guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be reacting to a video called Turns Out Germany Had Flying Trains in the 1800s, I guess. So this is a very interesting title. It looks very futuristic and it doesn't look real, to be honest, because what do you mean they have flying trains? And in the 1800s, it looks like I'm being sort of like conned into thinking there's like something futuristic and alien happening. But I don't know, so I'm excited to find out. So let's check it out and comment, like, and subscribe.
This floating train is one of the strangest things you'll ever see.
Oh my god,
its
okay.
genius, gravity-defying design seems straight out of science fiction, but to the locals in this very real German city, it's just a way of life. And it's already been running here for over 100 years.
I need a moment. What?
Why did this technology take off here and nowhere else? It's the story of how one city solved its geography nightmare, featuring war, tragedy, a controversial inventor, and even an elephant falling out of a floating train.
Okay, there's like a lot of things happening.
No. Really, in the 1800s, the valley of the Wupper River here in northwestern Germany began industrial revolutioning a little too close to the sun. More factories are constantly opening to process the abundance of raw materials found nearby, and this surge in jobs creates an influx of population growth in the towns along the river, which are gradually sprawling into each other and will eventually merge into the one city that we now know as Wuppertal. But that rate of uncontrolled growth and expansion created a nightmare scenario.
Obviously, I'm assuming it has never happened, but because my mind goes to like worst case scenario, if I'm like in one of those cars down below, I would be constantly thinking the train's gonna like separate and it's gonna fall over on top of me. So, I don't know. I'm wondering if they have ever thought of this. Probably not.
Most cities sprawl outwardly at all angles, but as the name Valley would suggest, the flat land here is only along the river, so a huge new population centre arranged itself in this unusually long shape without any real city planning or forethought. The narrow streets were such a busy mess that attempts to build street-level trams never really took off, leaving Wuppertal to become one of the world's first ever traffic congested cities, even before Henry Ford took that concept worldwide. The amount of new houses, businesses and factories being built on this land created demand for a mode of transport to get between them all, but it also took away any space in which you could build that transport. There wasn't any room left for overground trains, the ground was way too hard and rocky to repeat the newfangled success of the London Tube, and the river itself was far too shallow to do any real transport on. So what's the solution, other than subscribing to my channel? Don't forget to do that while you're here, thank you. No, the real solution if you're in 1880s Wuppertal is to wait for a local inventor to say, I've got just the thing. Let's use the only space we have left. The air above the river. Eugen Langen was born in Cologne in 1833, first working for his father's sugar business before starting his own manufacturing and engineering companies, including a factory in Cologne that produced railway carriages. And it was here that he was able to build a prototype for his pet project, the Schwebebahn, or the floating train. But how does it work? Well, the design is actually pretty simple. In the floating train, you have a metal track with wheels running along it, which is pretty much normal. Apart from the fact that the train then hangs off of those wheels instead of sitting on them. This kind of upside down monorail actually provides quite a smooth ride, and since the carriage swings outwards while turning, you can take corners with surprising speed without making it uncomfortable for passengers. It's an invention that still defies categorization, equal parts Victorian and space age, and its story up to the modern day includes more intriguing twists and turns than the route itself. Despite initial local skepticism,
I'm wondering if when you're if you're in the train as a passenger, you feel like you're floating in the air, or you don't really get the feeling of like there's nothing. I don't know, it would be such a weird experience.
The city went with his idea, and 20,000 tons of steel later, in 1901, the Wuppertal Suspension Railway was completed and opened to the public. And the effect is this absolutely mad sight. You're walking along the pavement or sitting in a car watching a train go above your head. And I don't mean looking up at opaque train tracks like in plenty of cities. No. I mean literally looking up at the train carriage dangling above you. This thing makes Yorgos Lanthimos movies look like documentaries. And inside the train, it's an equally remarkable experience, with neither young nor old wasting the opportunity to marvel at the ride, as it flies you gracefully over views of the city and the river.
It's crazy, I don't know.
Just absolutely wild. Think about that reaction for a second. It's from a person in 2025, a person who's been all over the world, who's been on the Shinkansen, a person who's watched Blade Runner 2049 inside a metal tube 30,000 feet above the Atlantic, a person who
Yeah,
has
but
the
we're
whole
used to
sum of
this.
human knowledge in their pocket and who's still having that reaction. But this thing opened in 1901. Look at
Those
this
people-
early footage of the ride.
So
Think how
they're
this
in the
person
future.
must have reacted, and this person, and this person.
This is
The
crazy.
gasps must have been more deafening than the engine itself.
I would think
They're
it's
living
like
in a world where
witchcraft.
Bismarck, Brahms, and Queen Victoria have only just died. Aeroplanes aren't a thing yet, and television won't be invented for another 30 years.
That's crazy.
They've almost certainly never even seen the projection of moving pictures, and suddenly this exists
happens.
in their city. It's hard to imagine how it must have felt to see and hear it running for the first time. Sadly, its inventor Langen never got the opportunity to see his brainchild
died?
fly, as he died before it opened, leaving behind a complicated legacy. He's known as a great inventor in many fields, but like so many of the wealthy elites of his day, he was also a big believer in empire. He funded and even chaired various colonial institutions,
Well-
and even prototyped a so-called tropical version of this suspension railway, which was to be powered by animals and used in extracting resources from German East Africa. That
My
never
God.
came to fruition,
Okay.
unlike this one that I'm riding.
Good.
But even this almost didn't make it off the ground. Langen had pitched the floating train to numerous cities in Europe who were understandably unwilling to be the first ones to
were
finance
like,
such a
"Absolutely
risky
not."
idea, and believed that it posed more safety and noise pollution risks than a tube-style railway, until
Yeah.
he stumbled upon Wuppertal's city planning nightmare,
They were
which
like-
was actually his dream use case. Other monorails fail when they try to branch out, but not this one. Here there's no need for the complication of connecting lines and junctions. With all the population living so close to this one artery, it's basically the 1890s
Oh.
German steampunk version of the Line City in Saudi Arabia. And in a city with a desperate need for transport but a desperate lack of space, train tracks with a
Yeah.
ground footprint this size are actually genius. And by building it above the river, you conveniently follow the flattest gradient through the city, since, you know, the water has carved out its own level
How do you
route
get
in
in
this
on the
valley.
train?
Nowhere is this absolute
Just occurred
lack
to
of
me.
flat land on which to build normal infrastructure more apparent than when you actually visit Wuppertal and take 2 steps away from the river, being immediately met with steep staircases and
Okay.
houses that look like they're
Those towns are
stacked on
crazy.
top of each other.
No, those towns are
What a
insane.
climb. And you can see how I'm only this far away from the monorail, and I'm
Yeah.
already this
Those
far
towns
above
are
it. And even
crazy.
looking over to the other side of the river and the houses there, it all goes this steeply, this immediately
They all go
again
like
on
that.
that side. So you can easily see how in some parts of town, the river is really the only flat space. During construction, there was enough skepticism that this futuristic design could really support moving vehicles that it earned itself the nickname the Devil's Ride, a moniker that in those days could only be dispelled in one way: a display of faith by a famous person. In 1901,
Okay.
Kaiser Wilhelm II and Empress Augusta Victoria
They were like,
rode the train
"We're
as
riding
part of
it."
a cleverly crafted opening ceremony, and the imperial spectacle of it all successfully rewrote local perception
it's
and
good
set
for
the
the
railway
king.
on the path to becoming
for
an
me.
indispensable part of public life here. You can even hire a replica of that original Kaiser carriage for special events today, but ask any Wuppertaler and they'll tell you that the Kaiser and the Empress aren't the most notable passengers,
Who
not by a
then?
long way. That honour belongs to Tuffy the elephant.
This is-
Yes, she was an actual elephant. She was
This is
put on the
like
train as
irreparable.
part of a publicity stunt by the local zoo in 1950, but scared by the noises and the motion, Tuffy broke out of the carriage and fell from the train into the river. Remarkably, she actually survived the ordeal,
Okay.
and her landing place is now commemorated by this stone. But it's not just the elephants that are resilient
Just
around
like
here.
animal.
After bombings during World War II, the Schwebebahn was already repaired and reopened by 1946. And it's
Oh.
stories like that that anoint the floating train as a beloved symbol of innovation and defiance for the local people here, who have by now been able to rely on it for generations. This suspension railway is actually statistically one of the safest methods of transport in the world, with so few incidents in its 124
How
years
come
of
we're not doing
service.
this
But
then?
it wasn't quite able to make it a perfect century, and its record is not without tragedy. On the 12th of April 1999, the train fell
So
from the
recent.
tracks into the river, causing its first, and so far only, fatal accident in
See?
which 5 people sadly lost their lives. It was
This
the
is what
first
I'm
train of
scared
the
of.
day that morning, and an investigation found that the derailment was caused by overnight maintenance workers failing to remove a clamp that they had attached to the rails while
Oh
carrying
my
out repairs.
God.
The Schwebebahn was closed for a year while maintenance and inspection procedures were improved and has operated without major incidents ever since. Today, it carries 80,000 passengers a day, serving 20 stations across its 13-kilometer route,
wanna see a
departing about
station.
every 4 minutes during the day. Alongside its remarkable longevity, it's also striking to this foreigner just how smoothly it integrates with the rest of the transport network. Far from running it as a separate novelty where you have to make an account and download a QR code to pay to use it, you can just transfer off a train or bus onto the Schwebebahn with the same ticket. But the main problem for suspension railway absolutists, who I'm sure that there's at least 3 of in the world, is that virtually no other city is this shape. Everywhere else sprawls in a circle, so they need a full network of connecting lines. Some cities also
It's
lack
true.
this neatly
Well,
drawn line of dead air
not
in which to
always.
put your dangling trains. And when you include the fact that metro tunneling technology only got more and more sophisticated over the last century, it's easy to see why almost nobody else goes with this niche solution. I say
But there-
almost nobody because there are a couple of
Yeah,
other
I can
smaller
think
ones
of-
in Germany and Japan, and plenty of tourist attractions in the US have installed these as a gimmick and later shut
No,
them
but
down.
actually,
But Wuppertal is
for
definitely
use.
still the classic example of really integrating this futuristic idea into a city's network. Only, is it even that futuristic? After spending the entire day here, I did begin to wonder. I mean, it's kind of crazy to even be asking that question when you're sat on something designed in the 1890s. That was the
Yeah.
era of new faith in technology, of eccentric inventors promising to solve people's problems in new ways. It was the optimism-tinged pre-Titanic era of the World's Fair and the promise of a better
It's
future for
true.
humanity. But does that make the Schwebebahn actually futuristic,
Yeah.
or just the past's idea of the future? And if this was such a built-up and industrialized area full of smog from factories, would the people of Wuppertal in 1901 not have been sad to have the one remnant of nature in the city centre be covered up by even more metal and engines? Maybe what's most remarkable about it is that of all of the ridiculous things that were invented in that time period, this one has the distinction of actually existing
Yeah.
and of still being just as relevant to solving people's problems as it was when it was first
It
conceived.
speaks highly
If
of
other
it.
trains are iron horses, this one is more like the great steel vein through which flows the heartbeat of Wuppertal. Langen's floating train's remarkable career of 124 years and counting is undoubtedly a testament to the innovative spirit of those days. It's a symbol of dreaming big to solve complicated problems, and it put Wuppertal on the map, making itself the icon of the city and a beloved part of the daily lives of local people, who I'm sure would take up arms to prevent its removal. If you've been lucky enough to
course.
ride it yourself, let me know what you thought of it. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Monorail, monorail.
Okay, yeah, I didn't know that this was a thing. I had no idea that this existed. But I'm glad to have known this. I think it's very interesting what he said, like in the end of like how like you see it and it's like, oh, how futuristic. But it's like, is it really? Because like when you take into account the fact that it was built like in the 1800s, is it that futuristic? It's like, yes, I think it's a really good point of, how, it's like how I think it actually makes you ask a lot of questions. Like, what is it about this that makes me think of like the future? Because again, if people in the 1900s, 1800s were thinking of this, it can't be that futuristic, or maybe for them it was, but I think it's crazy that for us in this day and age, we're still like marveled by it. And it speaks like, okay, then how come we think it's something that's straight out like a sci-fi film? I think it's the fact that we don't really have like things that are in the air. Like, it's not, I think that's what it makes it look like, that shock of like, whoa, there's like a flying train. And it's like, yes, because we don't really get to see that very often. Even if you have like the trains that are like the aerial trains, like they're not the same, because obviously they're not like, it's not like, the train track is here and obviously the train is on top. It's not like the train track's above the train and the train is just sort of like hanging. That seems, that's not a common occurrence. So I think that's what at first glimpse you're like, whoa, what do you mean that the train is like hanging? I think it's crazy. for like several reasons. Apparently, like it's very safe, which I'm glad. They only have like they had like one accident, and well, the elephant accident, which I think people were crazy back in the day. I'm scared for the elephant. Hopefully he or she, I don't know, lived like a very fruitful and happy life after this incident, hopefully. But obviously the other accident that occurred in I think it was 1999, that was quite recent. It's like in a modern era. I think it was sort of like, it was an accident, so it's kind of crazy to me to say like it was a predictable accident. It wasn't. I mean, you couldn't have, obviously they didn't do it on purpose, but it was an accident at the end of the day. But what I mean is like it was human error, which obviously can occur, it can happen. It wasn't something about like the train malfunctioning or, the design being, the design failed. No, it was just a thing about, again, it was human error. It could have happened basically anywhere. And sadly, it happened like it happened to them. But it wasn't a flaw in the design, which actually, again, sounds crazy that the train has been running for like 100 years and they just had like one incident of this happening. And again, it was human error. I think it's kind of like, I don't know, because it's crazy, and they were like, well, it is one of the only cities that, there's like a few of them, but it's like one of the only cities that, this could have been implemented because of like what he explained. Like the whole city is just like, it's the only like flat terrain in the city, because otherwise like there's like a little, and it's just like in the center, everything goes along the river, and the actual like, I don't know, where people live or other stuff, or other places in the city are like very steep, and you have to go like a bunch of stairs. I think I've been in cities like that and towns like that, and it's crazy. Like you only have like a flat little thing, and then everything you move like, oh, I want to go there, and it's like, it's super like you have to go, and there's like a huge like a flight of stairs that's like 100 stairs, or it's just like a very steep hill to the other side, and everything's like that. Those cities to me are quite crazy. I understand, obviously they're clearly a thing. But it is kind of like a trip to be in one of those places. And of course, this is the perfect solution, because otherwise you just kind of have to like walk, or they have like buses, or usually they have like, but they have buses or trolleys. And that's what gets you along, but it's just like straight on. I think this could be implemented in other cities, and I'm surprised by the fact that it has because again, it's not every city, it's not going to work in every major city, because again, it's way too late. The cities have been built for like 500 years, 400 years. So you can't actually like switch around the city planning. But, I get what he means. So like a lot of cities are built sort of like in a circular manner. I don't know if circular is actually like the actual sort of like, I don't know, the design. But I understand. It's like, yes, there's a lot of, I think cities are built in like, you have like a little, like a center sort of like artery, or a major, it could be a highway, it could be, I don't know, like a street, it could be something, it's just sort of like straight, always it maybe have a bit of curves maybe, but to this side of it, like there's stuff, and there's like, you always have to sprawl, and maybe that's what he means with a circle. You always have to like sprawl and go to like a different street over there, or a different street like to the east, to the west, or to the south. And that's obviously is going to make it something like this hard, because you can't actually like, you would need to have like a bunch of different like, I don't know, like stations and stops. And obviously when you're in a subway, I think it's a bit harder to actually, at least I don't know if that's always the case, but at least to me, when I'm in a subway, I think it's hard. I can see the map, and obviously I know, oh yeah, this is my stop. But it's hard for me to actually like understand how the trains are sort of like placed underground, because it's like, oh, I know where this is, and I know where I went and where I come from, but to me it seems like maybe it's sort of like a straight line. Maybe it isn't completely straight, but again, it's like you traveled south, but when you're in the train, you're not actually seeing, oh, it turned, it was a bend. I don't know if that's always the case. Maybe it's just me that I'm sort of like clueless about it. But when I'm in a subway, I'm not thinking, oh, this was a curve, or oh, I went south, I went east. Well, you sort of like know where, if you went east or south, because again, because of the stops. But you're not actually feeling the thing of like, oh, I'm traveling here. So it is kind of like difficult to sort of like actually get the sense of like, where is it located, and where are you located, and how the subway lines are actually, the tunnels actually are. I do not know. I have no idea about how they're built. I don't know if like usually they try to make it like in a straight line, and obviously they're going to have some bends because everything's not perfectly straight. Or again, maybe you have like, maybe that's what you have, like when you have like, you have to make like, oh, you have to like make a stop, and there's like a little, when you have to like, there's a transference and you have to like transfer somewhere, and maybe that's where like you can't actually like put a tunnel that is like completely like bent 90 degrees, and maybe that's what you have to make a transfer. I don't know, I have no idea about it, but it's maybe that's a little bit of like the case that he's speaking of, like you can't actually make something like that, underground. It's sort of like maybe a little bit easier, and when you're on the air, obviously you can't just go like, oh, go there, go that, it's gonna be like time consuming, it's gonna be a hassle, and it's better to just to have done it underground, because again, all the lands are there, like you're not gonna like build a subway. Well, I don't know, are places that are actually building subways these days, like cities that are like, oh, we're building a subway. I think that's kind of must have been. I think it's a little bit less common these days, but actually I think there's cities that are actually still in the process of like building their own subways. I would love to know actually the process of construction, because it sounds very interesting and kind of foreign to me. But this whole air situation, I think, would solve some problems. I think I can think of like a few cities. Maybe it's not gonna be like, oh, it's gonna run like in this case that it runs through the whole city. But I think there are some towns that actually do lend themselves to it. Like again, if you have a central sort of like artery, you can put this sort of like air floating train, right? Like at least I can. Maybe that's why I'm not an architect or an engineer. I'm thinking you can do that, isn't it? I'm not saying it's easy, but I would say it would be a good solution. Again, maybe they don't do it because maybe like it's not cost effective, but I'm thinking it could be a solution for some of them. And maybe I think it's something that they didn't really mention, but I think something that really does actually influence the fact that it works there and maybe not in a lot of places is the fact that I think it's only like one little sort of cabin from what I could see. And even though it happens like every 4 minutes, like the train's like, it's fast. But it only, I think, the only passenger is like small. The capacity is not that big. I think he mentioned, I think it was like around 80 people a day. And that's not a lot. I think that's good for like a very small town. But if you transport, around, if I understood it correctly, it was 80 people a day. Maybe it was 80 people per hour, maybe. But still, even if it's 80 people per hour, it is a small town. A lot of places, I think, and that's probably the biggest hurdle, is that a lot of cities, they have more people. So it's like you would need to have a huge, like, I don't know how many cabins you would need to have in order to transport and sort of like solve the solution of like transporting the amount of people that actually live and work here. And maybe that's the case. I don't really know if something like this would work with like more little cabins and more trains. Maybe it only works with like a small compartment, it's because it's not that heavy. Because I'm wondering if you had to put like several compartments and more like a subway type of thing of like you have like a bunch of like I don't know how many actually compartments, or how many actually, like, again, how many does a train have or how many does a subway have? But obviously there's more than this. So I'm wondering if that's a problem, that if you put more weight into like the train tracks, then the whole thing collapses. I don't know, maybe they're scared of that. I know I would be scared. So I don't know, but again, maybe that's just me. But this was very interesting, and now I think I want to go visit. I think we a pretty weird experience, like he mentioned. It would be incredible, but actually I'd be a little bit scared of just the thing of like I'm floating and knowing like I'm in the air suspended. I think it's a little bit crazy, but I would love to actually ride on one of these things. But that was it for today, and I'll see you soon. Bye.